Hi, it's T with TeaQuilts, and in honor of starting the Benartex fabric collection coming back to my home, I thought the only proper thing to do would be to use at least one of the packages that I currently have in my stash. So I organized everything and I actually put it into a file cabinet drawer by the issue date. And this pack here, I didn't have a newsletter that fit this pack, so I must have lost a newsletter somewhere. But this collection is from the Nancy Kirk Civil War collection too. I have no idea what time this came out, like what period, what year. When I was filing my packets, I found out that I was doing this from 2002 to 2008. So I actually have 6 years of these packs. In addition to this one here that I can't identify, I also have 2 more that don't have a newsletter included. And I'm thinking that they must have been prior to 2002 because I probably wasn't thinking to save them at that time. I was just collecting the fabric because I didn't have a lot of stash or a lot of scrappy stash that was already pre-cut. Pre-cuts were not as popular at that point. So I'm going to do a pretty cool technique with this quilt top. I saw it in an old book, and of course I don't have the book, but if I find it, I will put the information down below as well as in the comment field. But I also saw Lynn Brown do this where she called it twist and turn. But this technique is very old. I saw it years and years ago, and I've used it on rail fence quilts, 9-patch quilts. You can use it on any type of quilt that you like. So I am going to first go and sew all of these squares into a panel. From this Civil War collection, I have 40 squares laid out, and I have one extra one that didn't make it. So this packet actually had 41 4-inch squares. So I'm going to go and sew this just into straight rows into a panel, and then I'm going to show you my next step. I have sewn my panel, and all I did was just press the rows in opposite direction. For those that are wondering, I did not press my seams open for this. What I do want to point out is that I took the lightest values in the quilt and I marched them diagonally through the quilt this way, and then also from here to the corner, so that I would have my light values all in a particular spot. It looks a little strange right now, but I will show you in the next step what we're going to do with that. Now next, I am actually going to cut my quilt top. Yes, I said it correct. I am actually going to cut through these center areas. Now, since I know that I'm going to end up with bias edges on the outside when I show you this technique, I put a little spray sizing into my quilt top after I pressed it. So let's get this cut. I don't know how much of this I can show you in the screen, so I'm going to use a smaller ruler because this one's a little cumbersome, and I'll just have to start and stop. What I actually want to do is to put my edge of the ruler right into the seam that intersects each of the squares. So I'm going from the corner to a seam. So I'm only going to cut the first 3. And actually I am cutting a 45-degree angle when I'm actually making these cuts. So I'm going to cut through these 3 squares. Okay. And then so you can see, I will just slide down and continue to cut through the remaining squares. Okay, so now I have this piece here. So I will just move it out the way. It's not attached anymore. And now I want to do the exact same thing from this corner down to this center. Okay, so now I have 3 pieces. And now that I have 3 pieces, my goal is to have all of my light fabrics facing outward. So this is going to now be my top corner. I have most of my light fabrics that are now triangles. I want to put them on the outside edges of the quilt top. And then they're sewed back together. So let me slide this down so you can see it. I'm not sure where my camera is, so let me check it. So now when I sew this together, this is what I will have, but again, I have bias edges on the outside. So once I sew these 3 panels back together, then I'm going to go ahead and do a stay stitch around the outside edges to help stabilize the seams. So that's a quick way of putting a quilt on point without having to do all the setting triangles to do that. So I'm going to come back in just a few minutes. Here's my completed quilt top after I have sewn the 3 pieces that I cut back together, and I have stay stitched along the edge. Before I cut this quilt, my blocks, when I first sewed them, the quilt top was 18 by 28.5 inches. That's from edge to edge, raw edge, unfinished. Now that I have cut this piece and sewed it back together, my piece is now 25.25 inches by 20.1/8. I just thought I'd share that size with you. I'm actually going to go through my stash and see if I can find some fabric to use with this. I don't have a whole lot of reproduction fabrics, but I'm sure I got some old stuff in my fabrics that I set aside to make backings with that might work with this quilt. So once I do that, I'll come back and let you see my next step. So I have decided to sew a couple of borders onto my quilt. I decided to add a 1-inch finished border that I cut 1.5 inches wide. And then I also added a border that finishes at 2 3/4 inches. So I cut it 3 1/4 inches wide. So now my completed quilt top is 32 3/4 inches by 27 5/8 inches. Also, as you're looking at this, you may not be aware that when you do this technique, you will lose the point on the edge of your quilt, and I purposely left that for last because if I probably would not have told you, it wouldn't have been as obvious. But I think for the quickness of putting a quilt on point, I have done this technique with like rail fence quilts that is really a great technique. I'll go ahead and take a few pictures. I will add a full upshot photo of the quilt at the end. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye-bye.